First, the prosecution will call Detective Murphy Barnes, who was in charge of the entire investigation into this heist. This case on the surface appeared to be a simple, open and shut case for Detective Barnes, but her perception of this case as such has led to a deeply flawed investigation. The evidence will show that Detective Barnes never truly follows up on another very obvious potential suspect in this case, Sydney Ross. Ross was a security guard at the Walters, meaning that she was one of the few people who would have known that the internal security cameras were not working at the Walters the night of the robbery. Barnes is told that Ross had quit her job at the Walters about 2 days after this robbery. The evidence will show that despite all this, Detective Barnes never followed up with Sydney Ross again. As you listen to her testimony tonight, we ask that you ask yourselves this question. Is this the work of a thorough investigation, or is this the work of a detective who has rushed to judgment and blinded herself to another clear suspect? The prosecution may also attempt to bring up a $7,800 deposit into my defendant's bank account, which Gardner has said is a gift from her uncle. The prosecution will attempt to point to this as a payment for the artwork that was stolen from the Walters. While listening to their testimony, we ask that you consider the following. These paintings were estimated to be worth around $600,000. Is this $8,000 deposit really a payment for paintings that are meant to be worth over $500,000? Or is it simply the gift that the defendant has claimed it to be? Lastly, the prosecution may also attempt to point to Casey Hudson, claiming to see Gardner's face. We ask that you listen to how Hudson claims to have seen her face. Through a slit blindfold, in a mirror, with one eye, in the dark, while being severely distracted by the perceived firearm that had been pointed at him. While listening to his testimony, we ask that you consider the following. Did Hudson truly see incriminating evidence placing Gardner at the scene of the crime, or were the guards still thinking about Gardner after Banerjee had been surprised to see her earlier that night? The defense would like to remind the members of the jury that the burden of proof in this trial lies firmly with the prosecution. The prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that 19-year-old Izzy Gardner was the mastermind behind this museum heist. This means that in order for Izzy Gardner to be convicted, there cannot be any reservation in any juror's mind of Izzy Gardner's guilt. The defendant cannot be convicted of a criminal charge based off of a series of coincidences and imaginations run wild. I implore you to ask yourselves, is Izzy Gardner truly the mastermind behind this museum heist? Or is she simply a 19-year-old girl who was in the wrong place at the wrong time? Izzy Gardner is being tried this evening for the theft of 3 paintings from the Walters with a value of over $100,000, as well as first-degree assault. At the conclusion of this trial, the defense asks that you reach the only verdict consistent with the evidence, not guilty.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution would like to call its first witness.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The state calls Miss Casey Hudson to the stand. Good evening, Miss Hudson.
Good evening.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Casey Hudson.
Where do you work, Miss Hudson?
I work at the Walters Art Museum.
And what is your position at the Walters?
I'm a security guard.
How long have you been working security at the Walters?
Well, as of January 2020, I've been working at the Walters for a little bit over 2 years.
Let's talk about the night in question. What time did you arrive to work on January 4th, 2020?
I got to work at around 8 p.m.
And who were you working with that night?
That night, I was working the overnight shift alongside my coworker, Jamie Banerjee.
Ms. Hudson, could you walk the court through the events of your shift that night?
Yeah, so the first significant thing was when my coworker, Jamie, took a break at around 10:30 p.m.
And what happened next?
Jamie returned from his break and he told me that he had seen one of our former coworkers, Izzy Gardner, in the alleyway.
What was your reaction to that?
Thought it was pretty odd. I hadn't seen Izzy in a while, but I didn't think about it too much. I had a job to do.
Did anything else happen that night?
Everything was normal up until around 1:30 in the morning.
What happened at 1:30?
Jamie and I, we were in the main lobby by the front entrance when somebody rang the bell at the front door.
What, if anything, did you see when the bell rang the morning of January 5th?
I saw two people on the camera feed who were dressed as Chesapeake City police officers. They were both in full uniform, wearing full face coverings, and I couldn't see anything but their eyes, and they were wearing gloves. It was pretty cold out that night, so it didn't seem too out of the normal.
How did you respond?
Well, I mean, as a security guard, I trust my fellow officers and I respect them, and I thought they were cops. So I buzzed them in.
What happened next?
Well, as soon as they walked in, they moved toward us and they pulled Jamie and I's hands behind our back, and our hands were zip tied together. And that's when I realized what was happening.
What was happening, Miss Hudson?
That I realized that the museum was being robbed and that Jamie and I were in severe danger.
What did you do next?
Well, I started to struggle, but whoever was holding my arms spoke and they threatened me, telling me to be quiet and not do anything stupid. So I listened.
So you've been tied up and threatened. What happened next?
Well, I mean, I was also blindfolded, and then everything was quiet for a few seconds, and there was just silence until one of the individuals, they grabbed me underneath my shoulders and they started shoving me towards what I believe to be the main part of the museum.
And then what happened?
Well, we'd been walking for a minute or two when we stopped, and they pushed me up against a wall and they stepped on the back of my knees. So I sat down.
Could you see anything while you were there?
No, I couldn't see anything. The blindfold was completely intact, but I could hear them, and I heard these strange noises like somebody was cutting something.
What did you do when you heard this?
I figured that they might be distracted with whatever they were doing, and that this was going to be my best opportunity to try and get the blindfold off and to escape.
So what did you do, Miss Hudson?
Well, I leaned up against the wall and I propped myself up against it in a way that I thought would help me slip my blindfold off.
Did it?
No, it didn't. And after just a few seconds, somebody grabbed my shoulders and I sunk back down.
What happened then?
Well, after I sat back down, they pulled off my blindfold.
And what did you see when they took off your blindfold?
It was a gun pointing straight at my face.
Miss Hudson, I know this is difficult for you to talk about, so please take your time. Were you able to identify the type of gun?
Yeah, it was a handgun.
And how did you feel having a handgun pointed at your face?
I was absolutely terrified. I still cannot stop thinking about it to this day. I mean, I was tied up. I'd already been thrown around, but now I thought they were going to shoot me in the head. And I was so scared that I was going to lose my life.
Did the individual speak to you at this point?
No, but their message, it was very clear
And what was that message, Miss Hudson?
that if I didn't stop trying to escape or prevent what was going on, that they were going to shoot me and kill me.
What happened after you were threatened with the gun?
Oh, the person who was holding the gun, they pulled my blindfold back up, but it wasn't secured as well this time. And one side on the left slipped down a little bit and I could see out of my left eye.
What did you see?
I could tell that I was against a wall outside of the Renaissance and the Baroque room of the museum.
At this time, I'd like to show what's been pre-admitted as prosecution's Exhibit 10. Do you recognize this document, Lauren? Oh, excuse me, Miss Hudson.
Yes, this is the map of the Walters Art Museum that I'm very familiar with.
For the court's convenience, this exhibit has been zoomed in on the relevant area. Miss Hudson, what does this red X represent?
That is where I was during the night in question.
So that's all, Tech Captain, thank you. So your blindfold was down. Were you able to see what the perpetrators were doing?
Yes, I could see that they were in fact cutting something, which was painting out of its frame.
What painting was that?
That painting was Springtime by Monet.
At this point, I would like to show what's been pre-admitted as prosecution's Exhibit 2. Ms. Hudson, what is this exhibit?
This is an appraisal report of the stolen artwork.
I would like to direct the court's attention to page 3 of this appraisal report. Ms. Hudson, could you explain what's shown on this page?
Yes, this is a picture of the painting Springtime by Monet, which is the painting that I saw being cut out of its frame.
Thank you, TAC Captain. Ms. Hudson, were you able to see anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I could see the perpetrator and they still had their mask on. And for the most part, they had their back towards me, but then they paused and turned to the side just enough that I was able to see them through the mirror, and they were wiping sweat off of their forehead, which caused the mask to move just enough for me to be able to see who it was.
And who was it, Ms. Hudson?
It was Izzy Gardner, the defendant.
I would like to direct your attention back to the map of the Walters. Ms. Hudson, what does this green box labeled Springtime reflect?
Objection, Your Honor. I would appreciate it if my opposing counsel would enter exhibits into evidence before they started asking questions about them.
What's your position on that, State?
Your Honor, this exhibit has been stipulated as pre-admitted, and I've already used it twice in the court.
Defense, is that one of the pre-admitted?
I don't think it is, Your Honor.
Let's figure out real quick.
My apologies, Your Honor. It is not.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
Okay.
So the objection is sustained and you need to lay some foundation.
Okay. Ms. Hudson, could you repeat for the court what this document is?
Yes, this is the map of the Walters that I am very familiar with, that we use in the Walters Art Museum as reference.
And is this a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, this is.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to move prosecution what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Is there any objection from the defense?
Your Honor, we don't object to this exhibit being offered into evidence, but I think it was zoomed into and it was edited, so we object to the edited version being moved into evidence.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
I'm simply moving to move the original map into evidence. The additions are just illustrating my witnesses' observations and line of sights in the night in question.
What are the additions?
The red X and a few boxes.
Okay. I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that the witness can explain those in testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Great.
Go ahead, State.
Ms. Hudson, could you explain what this green box labeled Springtime represents?
Yes, that is the location of Springtime by Monet.
Ms. Hudson, what does this blue dotted line show?
This was the line of eyesight that I had to Springtime by Monet and how I was able to see it.
What does that yellow circle show?
The yellow circle is where I saw the people cutting Springtime out, which it was Izzy.
What does that black rectangle labeled mirror reflect?
That's where I saw the mirror and how I saw Izzy through that mirror.
And finally, what's that orange line, Ms. Hudson?
This orange line was my line of eyesight to the mirror and how I was able to see Izzy's face through the mirror.
Thank you, TAC Captain. Ms. Hudson, do you know the defendant, Ms. Gardner?
Yes, like I said, Izzy is a former coworker of mine.
When did the two of you meet?
We met about a month after I started working at the Walters, so that would be January of 2018.
What was your relationship with the defendant like?
I mean, I have to admit it wasn't great. Izzy and I, we hadn't always seen eye to eye on things when working together. I mean, she rubbed me the wrong way because she really came off as a know-it-all about the art when I was really just focused on the task at hand, which was my job. But I mean, we maintained a professional relationship and I would never let that influence my testimony today.
How confident are you in your identification of the defendant?
I'm very confident. I definitely saw what I saw. I mean, I know Izzy. I recognize Izzy's features, and those features were the features that I saw in the museum that morning.
What happened after you recognized Miss Gardner?
Well, after a few minutes, I heard footsteps heading away from me, and then it was just silence and silence and silence, and I didn't want to risk anything, so I just sat there and waited. And it felt like forever, but eventually my mask was pulled off, and I saw Jamie and our coworker and fellow guard Sydney Ross. They were standing in front of me, and we called 911 together, and it was just a few minutes before the first officers showed up.
What did you tell the police officers, Miss Hudson?
I told them everything that happened and everything that I saw, and that I saw Izzy Gardner in robbing the Walters in that morning.
Thank you, Miss Hudson. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. You worked with Miss Gardner at the Walters Art Museum at one point, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And part of the reason you took the job at Walters Art Museum was because you have $45,000 in student loan debt, correct?
Yes, I do, in fact, have student loan debt, like most people.
When working at the Walters, you took an immediate dislike to Miss Gardner, isn't that right?
I mean, like I said, we didn't really get along. Izzy was really a know-it-all about the art, and I was there to do my job, so we didn't really see eye to eye on that.
Turning to the night of the robbery, you were working the night shift with Jamie Banerjee that night, correct?
This is correct.
And at around 1:30 a.m., two people came to the door of Walters dressed as police officers, correct?
Yes, this is true.
And you and Banerjee let them in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I believed they were Chesapeake City police officers, and I had no reason to not believe they were Chesapeake City police officers. So I buzzed them in because I wasn't expecting what happened to happen, and I wanted to respect them. And I definitely thought it was odd that they were coming so late at night, but I would wanted to stay respectful towards, those who are above me.
But you didn't speak to them through the call box that Walters has to confirm their identities, right?
This is true. Like I just said, I thought they were police officers, and I had no reason to believe they weren't police officers, so I buzzed them in out of respect because I thought that they were police officers.
And you didn't call police dispatch to confirm their identities, correct?
This is true. I mean, I really did not have any reason to believe they weren't Chesapeake City police officers. I don't automatically presume that police officers who are dressed as officers aren't so I buzzed them in because I did believe that they were police officers.
But not calling dispatch is against your employer's protocol, isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, I will admit I didn't follow every aspect of the protocol, but like I said, completely believed that they were Chesapeake City police officers, and it was more of an action in passing. I didn't think this could have ever happened.
You say you saw a handgun held by one of the thieves, right?
Yes, there was a handgun straight at my face.
But you say it also may have been a fake gun, correct?
I mean, it could have been. I wasn't going to take that risk. I was choosing between believing it was a fake gun or my life. So I was going to presume that gun was as real as a gun can be.
You maintain that you saw the face of one of the thieves that night, correct?
Yes, I did see Izzy Gardner's face.
You saw the reflection of this face through a mirror, isn't that right?
I had direct eyesight to the mirror, and through the mirror, I could see the reflection of Izzy's face.
The mirror that was across the room from you, right?
Yes, the mirror that I could see that was in the other room.
And this was through a slip in your blindfold, right?
Yes, I could see out of my left eye.
All of this for less than a second, isn't that right?
I did not see Izzy for a long amount of time, but I know that it was Izzy because I sure know what Izzy looks like after working with her. So I'm very positive that I saw Izzy.
That was the only time you identified Miss Gardner as one of the robbers that night, correct?
When I saw her was when I identified her as the robber, yes.
No further questions, thank you.
Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You can step down. 1 minute, please. Will you call your next witness?
The prosecution calls Detective Barnes to the stand. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Detective Murphy Barnes.
Will you tell us about your credentials as a detective?
Well, I received an Associate of Arts degree from Anne Arundel Community College in law enforcement and criminal justice. And after that, I joined the Chesapeake City Police Department and completed the standard 500-hour law enforcement academy, which I graduated with high honors. And then I worked as a patrol officer before becoming a detective for the criminal investigation department. I was then promoted to senior detective, and finally my current role as chief of criminal investigation for the CCPD.
What, if any, additional training did you receive when you joined the criminal investigation department?
I attended two 10-hour training sessions on advanced investigative techniques, specifically in forensic evidence, witness interrogation, crime scene analysis, and body language interpretation. And after completing these trainings, I received a distinguished certification in criminal justice.
And since becoming a detective, what real experience have you had on and off the field dealing with robbery?
I've been a lead detective in over 500 cases, including a wide variety of theft and robbery cases.
At this time, Your Honor, we proffer Detective Barnes as an expert in criminal investigative techniques and ask that the court recognize her as an expert in this field.
Criminal investigative techniques is your offer. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Is there any voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Detective Barnes.
Good evening.
You say that your formal certification was only 500 hours, correct?
My certification at the CCPD was 500 hours, yes.
And this is the standard certification for all police officers, correct?
At the CCPD, yes.
And after joining the criminal investigation department, you received 2 additional training sessions, correct?
I did, yes.
And each of these was 10 hours, correct?
They were, yes.
And this brings your total official training to about 520 hours, correct?
With the CCPD, yes, but as I said before, I had a lot more training and experience when getting my Associate of Arts degree as well.
But this is as much formal training as any officer in the criminal investigation division would have, correct?
Yes, it would, but we
Formal
also
training,
have
sure.
on-the-job experience, which is incredibly important.
But Detective Barnes, this is as much formal training as any officer would have, correct?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense asks that the witness be rejected as an expert witness, as she has no more formal training than any officer in her division.
That's
Your
your
Honor.
entire basis, is that correct? Lack of formal training as opposed to any other officer?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, state.
Your Honor, given her training and experience on and off the field dealing with robbery, Detective Barnes is clearly qualified to be an expert in this case.
Defense points, you can argue those, you can point those out and cross-examine an argument. The detective is clearly someone who knows more than the average lay person, and because of that, I will qualify the detective as in criminal investigation techniques.
Thank you, Your Honor. Moving on, Detective, to the night of January 5th, 2020. Can you tell me when you first learned about what occurred at the Walters Art Museum?
I first learned about the robbery at the museum at about 4:56 a.m. when Sydney Ross called dispatch, who then notified me.
And what, if anything, did Sydney Ross say on this phone call?
Sydney Ross said that she had arrived at the museum for her shift starting at 5 a.m. and had found the museum guards, Casey Hudson and Jamie Banerjee, tied up and blindfolded inside, and reported that the museum had been robbed.
Objection, Your Honor. This statement was hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
I apologize to both sides. It takes me a minute to figure out the microphone, okay? Defense, which statement are you challenging as hearsay?
The statement that Sydney Ross made to the detective.
State what's your position on that.
Your Honor, Rule 703 states that an expert can rely on and use hearsay evidence to help form his or her opinions.
Defense?
Yeah, yes, she can use this to form her opinions, but she's offering this for the fact of the matter, which
Okay,
is excluded by that.
thank you. I'm going to allow some latitude, and I'm going to, because she is an expert, I'm going to allow the detective to answer that question. Proceed.
Your Honor. Detective, would you like me to restate the question?
Yes, please.
What, if anything, did Sydney Ross say on this phone call?
She said that she had arrived at the museum for her shift at 5 a.m. and had found the museum robbed and the guards, Jamie Banerjee and Casey Hudson, tied up and blindfolded inside.
And at what time did you arrive at the scene?
I arrived at the scene at 5:14 a.m.
And once you arrived, Detective, what did you immediately do?
I immediately secured the scene with crime scene tape and had the two other dispatch officers that had arrived at about the same time as me close down the block. And then together we secured the entrances and exits to the museum to ensure that no one could get in or out.
What did you do next?
Next, I interviewed the two guards at the museum at the time of the robbery, Miss Casey Hudson and Mr. Jamie Banerjee, and took written statements.
Detective, what did you learn from Jamie Banerjee?
Jamie Banerjee told me that he had been tied up in the lobby and that he had heard a voice coming from one of the perpetrators that he identified as Miss Izzy Gardner. He had actually seen Miss Gardner earlier in the day in the alleyway by the entrance to the museum.
And what did you learn from Casey Hudson?
Miss Hudson told me about a gun being shoved in her face and feeling threatened by said gun, and that she had seen with her own two eyes Miss Gardner cutting a painting out of its frame.
Thank you. I would now like to show the court what has been pre-admitted as exhibit number 2. Would the tech captain please pull that up? Thank you. Detective, is this the painting you're referring to?
Yes, this is Springtime by Monet.
And can you please explain this document to the court?
These are the appraisals of the stolen art in question, which professionally determine their current value. And as you can see here, we have Springtime, which was valued at $125,000.
And what is the
And
total-
and next we have Madonna of the Candelabra, which was valued at $175,000. And then finally, we have the Rubens vase, which is valued at $300,000.
And what is the total value of the stolen art?
$600,000.
And what is the minimum threshold for a theft charge under criminal law article 7-104 as it appears to this case today?
$100,000, which was clearly surpassed.
Thank you. That's all, Tech Captain. Moving on. After speaking with the two security guards, was there a suspect in mind?
Yes, I began to suspect that Izzy Gardner had robbed the Walters Art Museum.
And what evidence pointed you to the defendant, Miss Gardner?
Well, first, the eyewitness report from Casey Hudson that was corroborated by Mr. Banerjee's statement and audio recognition identifying Miss Gardner as one of the perpetrators. And second, the convenience that the security cameras at the museum were out of operation led me to believe that the crime must have been committed by someone with an intimate knowledge of the Walters Art Museum, which only further pointed me to Miss Gardner, who was a former employee and would have been able to discern that the system was down.
With the evidence you found and the testimonies from the two security guards, what did you decide to do?
I decided to reach out and interview Miss Gardner.
How many times did you speak with the defendant, Ms. Gardner?
Twice, once in person and once on the phone.
And based off those interviews, did you find any evidence that supports your conclusion that Ms. Gardner had committed the crime?
I did, yes.
And what evidence did you find?
Well, I received copies of Miss Gardner's bank records from her bank, Chesapeake National Bank, that were incredibly important in forming my conclusion.
I would now like to direct you to what has been pre-marked as prosecution exhibit number 7. Can you please explain this document to the court, what this document is, Detective?
Yes, this is the bank statement of Miss Izzy Gardner from Chesapeake National Bank.
And is this a document that is made and kept in the ordinary course of business at the bank?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to move prosecution exhibit number 7 into evidence.
Is there any objection to number 7?
No, Your Honor, this is a business record, so we do not object.
Exhibit 7 will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, can you explain to the court what these bank records show?
Yes, so as you can see here, the $7,800 deposit made on January 6th, which is conveniently the day after their robbery, caught my attention as it was a much larger sum than any amount previously deposited, as you can also see. And Miss Gardner had previously told me that she had been struggling financially.
And what did you do with these records?
After receiving and reviewing these records, I called Miss Gardner and spoke to her on the phone about them. And she told me a story which I was unable to corroborate. She said that her uncle had given her the money, but she had no record of this. And I have a real question about whether this supposed uncle even exists, as I looked for him and was unable to find or contact him.
And did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to what this deposit was?
Yes, I did.
And what is that opinion?
Well, it is common practice among criminals, and especially those that are desperate for money and inexperienced, to sell stolen items quickly for significantly less than what would be their traditional market value on underground markets. And this is consistent with the suspicious $7,800 deposit in Ms. Gardner's account.
Based on all the work you did, Detective, all the information you reviewed, and the witnesses you interviewed, have you formed an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to who committed the crimes at the Walters Art Gallery on January 4th and 5th, 2020?
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for conclusion of court.
Your Honor, the mic is muted.
Thank you. Appreciate that. What's the basis for your objection?
Your Honor, this question calls for the conclusion of the court. The expert cannot testify to who committed the crime.
Okay, what's your response, to prosecution?
Your Honor, as an expert, the detective can use the information she has reviewed to form a professional degree of certainty as to who she believes committed the crime.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, would you like me to read the question again?
That's all right. I have reached an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty.
And what is that opinion, Detective?
That Izzy Gardner robbed the Walters Art Museum of property valuing well over $100,000 and assaulted Miss Casey Hudson in the first degree.
Thank you, Detective. That's all, Your Honor.
1 minute, please. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Detective Barnes again. I would like to direct your attention to another person in this case, Sydney Ross. As you found out a couple of days after the heist, the security cameras had been knocked out for almost a week before the robbery, correct?
Yes, they had.
And they were still not fixed at the time of the robbery, correct?
They were not, no.
And somebody who works closely with the Walters Museum security system would have known this, would they not?
Yes, they would have.
And Sydney Ross is a security guard at the Walters, correct?
Yes.
And 2 days after the heist, Sydney Ross quit her job at the Walters, correct?
She did, yes. I was
And
looking at
when
Casey Hudson.
and when you called the number she had given you, it was out of service, correct?
That is correct.
And when you drove to the address that was given on her license, the house was dark, correct?
Yes, I knocked and received no answer.
And the forensic report showed that Sydney Ross's DNA on the outside of one of the stolen pieces of artwork, correct?
Yes, it did. However, that is not uncommon, as guards that work in the museum's fingerprints would be found all across the museum.
And you did not make any further attempts to locate Sydney Ross, correct?
I did not know, as there was no evidence pointing to Sydney Ross as being one of the perpetrators of this crime, and therefore decided that it was not a good allocation of department resources to pursue someone whom we did not have any evidence pointing towards.
And Gardner was the only suspect ever arrested for this case, correct?
She was, yes.
And there were 2 robbers who were at the museum that night, though, correct?
There were, yes.
In fact, you closed this entire investigation with that second robber still out there, correct?
Yes, at the time being, while we have Miss Izzy Gardner in custody and this trial is being held, we have temporarily closed the investigation.
One second. I would now like to move on to your reliance on Casey Hudson's statement. You arrived at the scene of the heist soon after it was reported, correct?
Yes,
And while there, you collected a statement from Casey Hudson, correct?
I did, yes.
And you also collected a statement from Jamie Banerjee, correct?
I did, yes.
And these statements differ on whether or not they use the call box, correct?
Yes, there was a very minor and there's a very minor discrepancy between the use of the call box.
And this statement by Casey Hudson, you relied on it to conduct your investigation, correct?
Yes, I relied on both these statements of Casey Hudson and Jamie Banerjee in conducting my investigation.
In this statement by Hudson, Hudson claims to have detailed how she claims to have seen Gardner's face, correct?
Yes,
And as the representative of the state's case tonight, you were present for Hudson's testimony this evening, correct?
I was, yes.
And you heard Hudson testify to the details of this eyewitness account tonight, correct?
I did, yes.
And this testimony tonight was the same as she gave you in the statement, correct?
I believe so.
And this is one of the key pieces of evidence that is tying the defendant to this case, correct?
Yes, Miss Hudson's eyewitness account was very important to the to my identification and eventual arrest of Izzy Gardner as a perpetrator of this crime.
In fact, it would have been difficult to center this entire investigation around Miss Gardner without it, correct?
Without this, yes. However, I did have other evidence that pointed to Miss Izzy Gardner, so this was not the only evidence, though it
But
was.
this is the only eyewitness account tying Miss Gardner to this case. Am I correct?
The only eyewitness account, yes. However, we did have an audio account, and we have the evidence of the bank records, as well as, you'll hear later, cell records placing her in the museum.
But this is the key eyewitness account that you say it would have been difficult to center this investigation around, correct?
This is the key eyewitness account, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective, did you conduct a complete investigation to the full extent of your expertise and training for this case?
I did, yes.
Thank you. That's all, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. One moment, please. I'm going to call your next witness now.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the state calls Dr. Jordan Matthews. Good evening, Dr. Matthews.
Good evening.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Dr. Jordan Matthews.
Dr. Matthews, could you please state your occupation and education for the court?
Yes, I am chair of the Telecommunications and Applied Engineering Department at Chesapeake State. I have a BS in Telecommunications from the University of Maryland, and I have a PhD in Applied Engineering and Mathematics from the University of Maryland as well. I worked as an assistant professor of engineering at Drexel University for 5 years prior to accepting my current position at Chesapeake State.
And how long have you held your chair position at Chesapeake State?
6 years.
Are you currently employed anywhere else?
Yes, I currently own and operate my own private consulting firm called Matthews Engineering Consultants.
Would you tell us about that position?
Yes, over the past 5 years, I've assisted the FBI in developing their cellular tracking technology, as well as served as an expert witness in cellular tracking and applied engineering in over 25 court cases.
And do you have any publications relating to that issue?
Yes.
What are those publications?
I have published one peer-reviewed paper titled Bringing Cellular Tracking into the Modern Courtroom that focuses on the science of cellular tracking.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to offer Dr. Jordan Matthews as an expert in cellular tracking technology.
So,
Permission to voir dire, Your Honor.
one moment, please. Cellular tracking technology.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, voir dire.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Dr. Matthews, you've indicated that you've testified over 25 times in court. Is that correct?
Yes, I have.
And in every single one of those cases, you testified on behalf of the government. Is that correct?
Yes, my consulting firm does not do defense work.
So, Dr. Matthews, even if a defendant with a solid case walks into your firm, you would turn them away?
As I said, my consulting firm does not do defense work. I testify on behalf of the government.
And you own and manage this consulting firm, correct?
Yes, Matthews Engineering Consultants.
So, Dr. Matthews, you're the one who dictates this policy of working exclusively with the government. Is that correct?
Well, my consulting firm does not do defense work, so I guess you could say that.
Yes. And as the owner and manager, you created this policy, correct?
Yes.
And you could change that policy at any point in time, couldn't you, Dr. Matthews?
Objection, Your Honor. I would like counsel, how is this relevant to the defendant's expertise on this matter?
Your Honor, I'm establishing a particular bias that the witness may have towards the state over individual defendants.
Thank you. I'm going to overrule the objection. I believe it's a legitimate exploration of the witness's bias before qualification.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
You could change this policy to work exclusively with the government at any point in time, couldn't you?
Well, I'd have to ask my other partners and other people who work at the firm.
But it is your firm, correct, Dr. Matthews?
Yes, but I don't
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
What's the basis again? Asked and answered?
Yes, Your Honor.
What's your response?
Your Honor, I'm simply, the defendant's statement implies that other people also manage the company with her, when in fact this consulting firm is solely Dr. Matthews. I'm just clarifying.
I thought there was a distinction, so I'm going to continue giving her latitude. Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, you are the owner of this consulting firm, is that correct?
Yes, but as owner, not every owner makes every single decision that happens in the firm.
All right, thank you. Now, Dr. Matthews, let's talk a minute about your interpretation of the data in this case. What data did you interpret in preparation for your testimony today?
I got the cellular records from Xfinity Mobile of Izzy Gardner's cell phone and the maps of Chesapeake City that include the cell towers. And using the cell towers in the data, I was able to find to a professional degree of certainty where the defendant's phone was certain periods throughout the night.
But in fact, Dr. Matthews, you didn't personally interpret any data, correct?
I located where the cell towers were and where the phone pinged off of, so that's how I was able to make the maps.
Dr. Matthews, do you remember signing an affidavit in preparation for this case?
I do.
And in your affidavit, you wrote, and I quote, "There's no interpretation by the analyst when referring to your work with the cellular location data." Do you remember writing this?
I do.
So is that true that you personally did not interpret any of the data in this case?
Right, but I still had to compile the maps.
So all you did was look at the data from a cell phone company and plot those points on a map, correct?
Yes, and this cellular tracking is very reliable and is widely standard in my field.
Dr. Matthews, I'm not asking about the reliability of the data. I'm asking about the work you conducted. Now, you don't need to be an expert to plot points on a map, do you?
I guess you could say that.
In fact, if I told you that I took the cellular data and generated a series of maps and that it took me personally all of 15 minutes to do, would you agree that this is possible?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor. The counsel's being argumentative toward my witness.
Your Honor, I can rephrase if you'd like.
Well, it's going to be sustained, and I think you injecting your personal evidence is inappropriate, so don't go into that.
I apologize, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, now you would agree that all you did to confirm was plot the data provided to you on a map, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense objects to the witness being qualified as an expert on account of the witness performing no data interpretation or scientific analysis in this case. She's done no work that an expert would need to testify upon.
What's the state's response?
Your Honor, my witness has been accepted as an expert in cellular tracking in over 25 court cases. She's written a paper that is widely cited in court and used in the basis of cellular tracking. She holds advanced degrees in telecommunications and mathematics. And although she has not done interpretation on the cell records themselves, she has analyzed the information given to her about this case and formed opinions regarding that.
Your Honor, if I may.
Quickly.
Yes, the work that the Dr. Matthews has done in the past, her education has no standing in the point that she hasn't done any scientific expert work in this case in particular.
All right, I'm going to overrule your objection. I believe the expert is entitled to take and analyze data as it exists. I will qualify her as an expert in the field of cellular tracking technology. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Dr. Matthews, how have you prepared for this case?
I reviewed the map of downtown Chesapeake City and the cellular data for the defendant's cell phone in order to generate my report.
And have you reached any opinions in this case to a reasonable degree of professional certainty?
Yes.
What are those opinions?
I've been able to narrow down the location of Izzy Gardner's cell phone to specific ranges within Chesapeake City during the night of January 4th and morning of January 5th.
Dr. Matthews, the defendant claims that she was in the alleyway looking for her wallet during the time of the robbery. Does that match up with the data you reviewed?
No, it does not.
Where was Miss Gardner's phone located during the time of the event?
In a range that includes the Walters Art Museum, but not the Engineers Club or the rear alleyway.
Let's move on to how you were able to reach those conclusions. Dr. Matthews, let me show you what we have marked for identification as Exhibit 9. Could the tech captain pull that up? Thank you. Dr. Matthews, are you familiar with this document?
Yes, this is the cellular location data for the defendant's cell phone from the night of January 4th until the morning of January 5th.
And from your experience, how is this information typically used?
The data show the network interaction to and from the defendant's cell phone. The records also document the cell towers that serve the cell phone and which antenna was pinged by the phone during the document.
Objection, Your Honor, this document is yet to be entered into evidence.
May I respond, Your Honor?
All right, back up a minute.
Hang
on a minute, I'm having technical issue here. Okay, now the objection was that the document had not been moved into evidence, is that correct?
Yes, and therefore the document's hearsay if it's yet to be moved into evidence, Your Honor.
All right. And
Your Honor,
go ahead.
I've been trying to lay the foundation to admit this document into evidence with my line of questioning.
Why don't you go ahead and move it and see if there's an objection?
At this time, I'd like to move it into evidence exhibit number 9.
Is there an objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Go ahead. It's admitted.
Thank you. Dr. Matthews, how are you able to use these cell records to inform your analysis?
I was able to compare the data from the cell records with a list of cell tower locations in downtown Chesapeake City, and I was able to find the approximate location of Gardner's cell phone throughout the night.
Dr. Matthews, you also mentioned that these records show which antenna was pinged by the defendant's cell phone during the period of activity. Could you please explain how this works?
Yes, a common misconception about cell towers is that their signals extend in all directions at all times. This is false. Each tower has 3 antennas that extend in different directions, each covering an approximate range. When a cell phone connects to a tower, it will connect to the antenna that is oriented in the direction of the phone.
And how does this help you determine the location of the defendant's cell phone?
In this case, the defendant's phone connected to antennas that cover specific ranges of Chesapeake City. I'm able to use those ranges to identify where Gardner's phone was located when it connected to the tower.
Dr. Matthews, at this time, I'd like to show you Exhibit 11B. It has already been admitted into evidence.
Does the defense agree?
Your Honor, the stipulates that it's already been moved into evidence, so we have no
Thank you.
objections.
Go ahead.
Dr. Matthews, could you please tell the jury what this exhibit is?
This is a map of the cell towers in downtown Chesapeake City.
And what do all those red dots represent?
Each dot represents a different cell tower in Chesapeake City.
How are you able to use this map?
Using this map along with the cellular records, I was able to narrow down the location of Gardner's cell phone throughout different periods of time during the night of the event.
And did your findings corroborate the defendant's account of events?
No.
Can you please explain why you think this?
The defendant's story matches up with the location of her cell phone up until 1:38 a.m. on January 5th.
What happened then?
Gardner's phone connects to cell tower 16X.
Tech Captain, at this time, could you please return to page 2 of Exhibit 9? Dr. Matthews, what is outlined here in red?
This is the ping from the defendant's cell phone at 1:38 a.m. As you can see, at this time, her phone connects to tower 16X.
And what range does antenna 16X cover?
This antenna's range includes the Walters Art Museum, but not the alleyway or the Engineers Club.
Dr. Matthews, at this time, I'd like to draw your attention to Exhibit 11F. This exhibit has also been pre-admitted into evidence. And for the court's convenience, this exhibit has also been enlarged to focus on the relevant cell tower.
Any objection, defense?
Your Honor, I think we'd like to object to the arrows and markings on the document, which I would argue are leading the witness to make certain conclusions, because this is not the original document that's been admitted into evidence.
All right, are you gonna, well,
Your Honor, may I respond?
yeah, you may.
So as of right now, there are no markings from us on this document. The red lines were already there on the original document. We just enlarged it so it would be easier for the court to see.
Is that accurate, defense? Do
Your
you
Honor,
agree?
yeah, at this case, the markings both on the previous document as well as the zooming in of this one particular document also, I would argue, are leading the witness to a particular spot on the document rather than allowing the expert to make her own conclusions.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I view that as an aid to the jury. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, would you please tell the court what this document is?
This is another map of downtown Chesapeake City. It shows the range that cell tower 16X covered during the night.
And what do those lines represent?
They represent the boundaries of antenna 16X. In order for a phone to connect to the tower, it must be located within this range during the period of activity.
And why is this information relevant to the case?
Between 1:38 and 1:50 a.m. on January 5th, the defendant claims that she was in the alleyway looking for her wallet.
Tech Captain, could you please highlight the alleyway on this map? What actually happened, Dr. Matthews?
The data show that her phone connected to tower 16X. As you can see, this tower's range does not include the alleyway. However, it does include the Walters Art Museum.
Tech Captain, could you please highlight the Walters Art Museum? Thank you. Dr. Matthews, what does this information tell you about the case?
Not only does this data place Izzy Gardner in the vicinity of the Walters during the time of the robbery, but it is also inconsistent with the report she gave to the police regarding her whereabouts that night.
Thank you, Tech Captain. That's all. Dr. Matthews, you've expressed a number of opinions in this case.
Can you tell the jury one last time why you're confident that the opinions you have offered are correct?
Absolutely. The methods I've used while conducting my analysis are standard in my field and have been extensively peer-reviewed. There is little to no risk of error when generating cellular maps based on this data, since there is no direct interpretation done by the analyst. We simply take the information from the cellular provider and use it to determine which cell towers were utilized. The maps I have compiled and my subsequent conclusions are completely reliable.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, let's talk about the time period in question, January 4th and 5th, 2020. A witness has testified that the break-in occurred around 1:30 a.m. And we know that at 1:32 a.m., the cell phone was pinging off of Tower 109X, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And Tower 109X includes the Art Museum, but also the Engineers Club, correct?
Yes.
And the cell phone pinged off of Tower 16Y at 1:38 a.m. Is that correct?
No, it pinged off a tower 16X.
And the data, I'm sorry, yes, 16X, apologies. But, and then it also pinged off that tower at 1:50 a.m., correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the next data point indicated that the cell phone tower pinged off of Tower 71Z at 2:03 a.m. And this does not include the Art Museum, correct?
That is correct.
And so at 2:03 a.m., the phone was not connected to the cell tower closest to the Art Museum, correct?
It was not.
Now, Dr. Matthews, in preparation for your testimony today, you reviewed a map of Chesapeake City, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you also reviewed the cellular data associated with phone number 667-210-2250 provided to you by Xfinity Mobile, correct?
Yes.
And did you review any other data?
I reviewed the maps, which are exhibits 3 and 9, and my own, which was exhibit 11.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Matthews, you never personally inspected the cell phone to see if it was working properly, did you?
No, but since it pinged during the night and the following morning, I assume it was working.
And you also never visited the crime scene, correct?
No.
And you never investigated the cell towers in Chesapeake City to make sure that they were working properly on January 4th and 5th, did you?
No, they were working because they gave me data from the night in question.
Mm-hmm. And if Xfinity Mobile had made any error in the data that was sent to you, you wouldn't know that, would you?
No, and I doubt that there was error from Xfinity Mobile, as they are a large corporation.
You doubt that, but there could still be error, and you would not know that if the error existed, would you?
No.
All right, and so if for example, Xfinity Mobile, as you said, they're a large corporation, had some kind of bureaucratic error and sent you a wrong cell phone's data, you would also not be able to know that, would you?
Objection, Your Honor. That calls for the witness to speculate about that.
Your Honor, she's an expert witness. She can speculate on this matter.
This is not relevant to her opinions. This is just relevant to the accuracy of someone else's data. So, Your Honor, you're also on mute.
Your Honor, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Now I see what the problem was. I thought I was unmuted, okay? What I was concerned about was people talking over people. Perhaps I engendered that because I was muted and I thought I wasn't, okay? The objection was on the basis of speculation. Am I correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Tell me precisely what you think was speculative about what was asked and what would have been offered.
Counsel asked my witness to speculate on the accuracy of T-Mobile's cellular records, and she used the reasoning that experts are allowed to give speculation. However, this does not relate to her opinions regarding the case. This just relates to someone else's data that they provided.
Okay, defense?
Your Honor, the accuracy of the data is inherently relevant to Dr. Matthews' ability to form an accurate conclusion in this case, and therefore Dr. Matthews should have the utmost confidence and certainty in the data that she uses to draw her conclusions. Therefore, I consider it extremely relevant to this case.
I agree that there's relevant to it, so I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Matthews, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Doc, you previously mentioned that Xfinity Mobile is a large company. So if by some small bureaucratic error you were sent incorrect data, you would not know, would you?
No, I would not know. I used the number, the data that was given to me, and it said it was from the cell phone number belonging to Izzy Gardner.
And Dr. Matthews, cellular tracking technology is imperfect, correct?
There is little to no risk of error in cellular tracking.
But it is not 100% perfect, correct?
Well, there's little to no risk of error, so I guess you could say it's not 100% perfect.
And cell phones sometimes do not connect to the closest tower, correct?
Yes.
And sometimes a cell phone can connect with a tower that's further away, correct?
Yes, that is possible.
And if a cell phone tower is overloaded by many connections, a phone could also connect to a cell phone tower further away, correct?
Yes, that is true, but I saw no evidence in the record that the cell tower was overloaded.
Dr. Matthews, how would you prove that a cell phone tower is overloaded?
Well, there would be many connections, but there's nothing in the records that suggests the tower is crowded or overloaded in any way.
All right, very well. And finally, Dr. Matthews, the data provided to you by the cell phone company tracks the location of a cell phone in question, correct?
Yes.
And you have no knowledge of who was in possession of that cell phone at the time that the times the usage it provided. Is that correct?
There was no reason to believe Izzy Gardner was separated from her phone, but no, I cannot say for certain if Izzy Gardner set foot in the Walters Art Museum, but I can testify to a professional degree of certainty that the defendant's phone was at the range that included the Walters Art Museum at 1:38 to 1:50 a.m. during the time of the robbery, but not in the shared rear alleyway or the Engineers Club.
To clarify, Dr. Matthews, you cannot confirm that Izzy Gardner was in that location at the time, correct?
Right, I'm not saying Izzy Gardner set foot in the Walters Art Museum. I'm saying where her phone was, and her phone was in a range that included the Walters Art Museum, not the rear alleyway.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. Your Honor, you're muted again. I'm sorry.
Thank you again. Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Dr. Matthews, on cross, counsel suggested that there could be some error in T-Mobile's cellular records. Did you find any evidence during your analysis to suggest that these cell records had a margin of error in them?
No, I did not. The records given to me looked normal. They showed that the phone had connected to different areas within Chesapeake City, which would make sense for someone who would travel to the apartment complex back to their job.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any recross based on that?
Just one question, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Matthews, you have no way of knowing whether the data that was sent to you by T-Mobile is correct. Is that correct?
Well, I don't work at Xfinity Mobile, so no, I don't know exactly if that data would be correct, but I am going on the assumption that it is correct, as that would be standard.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. And then, Your Honor, if we could also ask the bailiff for a time check real quick.
Bailiff, who's keeping time? Can you?
All right, thank
Put
you.
it
I
up.
see
There it
the
is.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to take a 5-minute break. I have it at 6:29, so let's have everybody back at 6:35. Okay? It's 6:35. Is everybody ready to proceed? Is defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor, defense is ready.
Okay, call your first witness.
Defense would like to call Izzy Gardner to the stand. Could you please state your name and age for the court?
Yes, my name is Izzy Gardner and I'm 19 years old.
Where were you born?
I was born in a small fishing town called Smith Island in eastern Maryland. I grew up helping around the dock there, helping my mom because my dad left when I was young.
Where do you live now?
I live in Chesapeake City.
How did you come to live in Chesapeake City?
I received a scholarship centered around art history, something I'm extremely passionate about, to complete high school in an independent study program.
What was the first job that you got in Chesapeake City?
I worked at the Walters Art Museum for class credit.
What was it like working at the Walters Art Museum?
I loved it, and I was extremely appreciative to be able to surround myself with something I'm so interested in.
What happened after your independent study program ended?
Times were really tough for a while. I was young and alone, and I didn't have any money. I was desperate and did something I deeply regret. I stole merchandise from Target, and I was convicted of a misdemeanor theft.
What do you think about that mistake now?
Again, I deeply regret it. I was young, stupid, but I paid for my mistake. I did my time for that.
Did that mistake ever affect your employment?
I did. Another employee, Sydney Ross, and I got into an argument. She told my boss, and I was fired for it.
What did you do after you were fired?
Again, times were really tough for a while, but I met Armani Lee, and I started living with her, and both of us were working at the Engineers Club.
Is your job at the Engineers Club stable?
Yes, I've gone through some tough times in my life, but I am more stable now.
How did Miss Lee get a job at the Engineers Club?
I helped her get it there.
What were you doing the night of Saturday, January 4th, 2020?
I was working at the Engineers Club with Armani Lee. We were working an event from 5 to 11 p.m.
How do you remember the specific times that you were working?
Every employee has to sign in and out. Our boss is very strict about that.
So what time did you start working?
I started working at 4:30 p.m.
And what time did you finish working?
I finished at 12:33 a.m.
How do you and Miss Lee usually get home from work?
We usually just walk. It's like roughly 15 minutes from work to home.
On the night of January 4th, 2020, did anything stand out to you while you were working your shift that night?
Yes, it did. At about 10:30, I was taking the trash out to the dumpsters in the alley between the Walters and the Engineers Club, and I saw Jamie Banerjee, who was a former colleague of mine at the Walters.
What interaction, if anything, did you have with Banerjee?
I tried to be friendly, but Jamie didn't really acknowledge me. It didn't really seem like she wanted to talk, but I didn't dwell on it, and I went back to work.
At about what time did the Engineers Club event end?
Everything wrapped up around 11 p.m., and all the other employees except Armani and I had left by then.
What time did you and Miss Lee get home?
We stayed to close up, and then we got home at 12:52 a.m.
How do you remember the exact time you got home?
I remember because I checked my phone when I realized I didn't have my wallet when I got home.
Did you go back looking for your wallet?
Yeah, I was pretty sure it was just back at the Engineers Club, so I decided to go back and look around for it.
Did Miss Lee go with you to look?
No, she was a little worried about me, but she was having relationship issues with her partner, and I honestly didn't want to bother her any further.
What time did you get back to the Engineers Club to look for the wallet?
I don't remember the exact time, but I think it was around 1:10 a.m.
Did you eventually find the wallet?
Yes, it took me a while because I had to look everywhere, but I eventually found it in the alley we share with the Walters. I think it must have fallen out while I was lifting those heavy trash bags.
What time was it when you found the wallet?
It was 1:46 a.m. Again, I checked my phone when I found it.
What time did you get home after finding the wallet?
I got home around 2 a.m. and Armani was asleep.
What did you do when you got home?
I went right in and went to bed. I had had a long night working. I was very tired.
Did anything unusual happen the next day?
Yes, I was approached by the police on the 6th.
Who from the police approached you?
It was the morning of the 6th. Armani wasn't home, and someone who introduced themselves to me as Detective Murphy Barnes approached me.
Did you let Barnes into your home?
Yes, I didn't know what she wanted to ask me about, but I wanted to be helpful.
What did Detective Barnes want to talk to you about?
They showed me a couple photos that took me a few moments to recognize, but I realized they were art pieces from the Walters. She told me they had been stolen.
What was your reaction to hearing this?
I was absolutely shocked. I loved those art pieces.
What happened next?
I was still in complete shock after she told me, "I know it was you." Barnes asked to look around the apartment. I said yes because I'm innocent and I have nothing to hide.
Were there any places in your apartment that Detective Barnes did not search?
Yes, I didn't allow her to search Armani's room because it's just not my space to give permission to.
Did Detective Barnes say anything more to you about the robbers?
Yes, she told me that one of the robbers used a gun.
Have you ever used a gun?
Absolutely not. I hate guns. I've never even touched one.
Did you have any other interactions with the police of note?
Yes, I did on January 9th, 2020.
What happened?
I was walking to work at the Engineers Club when 2 Chesapeake City police officers and Detective Barnes informed me I was being put under arrest for robbing the Walters.
What was your reaction to this?
I told them they had the wrong person and they could search me as much as they wanted, but they wouldn't find any proof that I had anything to do with the robbery because I'm innocent. Then I asked for my attorney and told them to stop asking me questions.
At this time, Your Honor, defense plans to bring up what I think my opposing counsel has already admitted into evidence. Prosecution Exhibit 7, if my co-counsel could share their screen. Okay. What are most of these?
1 minute. State, do you agree number 7's in evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
I thought so. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Gardner, what are most of these smaller deposits for?
I'm just working shifts at the Engineers Club, and the $600 deposit is to Armani for my monthly rent.
What about this $7,800 deposit on January 6th?
It's just a holiday gift from my Uncle Andy.
Do you know where your Uncle Andy is now?
My family is and probably always will be very complicated, so I don't know his address or phone number.
Is this $7,800 deposit from the sale of stolen art?
Absolutely not. It's just a Christmas gift.
And lastly, Ms. Gardner, would you ever think of robbing an art museum?
No, I love art and I would never want to disgrace it like that.
No further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Gardner.
Good evening.
You started to work at the Walters Art Museum in January of 2018, correct?
That's correct.
And you worked there for 2 years, right?
Yeah, about 2 years.
You spent hours roaming the halls of the museum. Isn't that true?
I spent hours in the museum doing my job, yes.
So you knew the ins and outs of the facilities, correct?
As anybody who worked there or who would visit there would know.
Such as the entrances and exits, right?
That's a part of the building, yes.
And where all the art pieces are located?
More or less, yes.
Ms. Gardner, you knew the Walters had a security system, correct?
I had knowledge of the Walters Museum, but I wasn't particularly focused on the security systems.
And this system, which included cameras, you passed by it every single day going to work. Isn't this true?
It wasn't a very significant part of my job or my life, but I suppose I did, yes.
And while working there, Ms. Gardner, you had a strong attraction to the Rubens vase, didn't you?
I completely respect the art that's held at the Walters Museum. Again, I'm extremely passionate about art, so I did very much admire the Rubens vase.
And you knew a lot about this vase, right?
Again, I'm a student of art, so yes, I did know about the Rubens vase.
Ms. Gardner, you are aware the Rubens vase was stolen during the robbery, correct?
I was informed by Detective Barnes, yes.
During this time, you were struggling financially. Isn't this true?
I've been struggling financially most of my life, but the Engineers Club provided me a pretty stable job.
And in need of money, you stole merchandise from a Target, correct?
I was very young then, and I've learned from that, but I did have a mistake in my past.
And you were caught and arrested by the police shortly after, right?
Yes, that did. I was paid my time for that offense.
To which you pleaded guilty to theft and were convicted, correct?
I was just stealing merchandise from Target as a young student in a city all alone, and I did plead guilty to that, yes.
And you were convicted, correct?
That's correct.
Miss Gardner, you stole because you were desperate, didn't you?
I was young, I was desperate, and I've learned from that. Yes.
So you're admitting that you stole because you were desperate.
In that time, yes, I was. I'm much different now.
Soon after, your coworker, Miss Ross, found out about your theft conviction, right?
Yes, she did learn about it, yes.
And you did not want Miss Ross telling your boss about your conviction, correct?
Of course, I was embarrassed about it. I regretted it.
And to keep her from telling your boss, you threatened her by saying she did not want to make me her enemy. Isn't this true?
That's something I said in the heat of an argument. I don't see myself as a particularly aggressive person, but I did say that, yes.
And once your boss learned of your prior conviction, he immediately fired you, didn't he?
Yes, I recognize that, and I've moved on from that. I now have a new job.
And you understood that the reason you were being fired was because your boss could not trust you, correct?
Yes, I wasn't particularly happy about it, as anybody would be, for losing their job from a mistake that they regret. But yes, that is correct.
In fact, you yourself said your boss thought you might steal from the Walters, didn't you?
Yes, but I would absolutely never do that.
And this ended your career at the Walters Art Museum, right?
Yes, that job ended, yes.
And when you lost your job at the Walters, you were again struggling financially. Isn't that true?
Yes, but I pretty quickly recovered.
Moving on to the night of January 4th, 2020, you were working at your new job, the Engineers Club, from 5 to 11 p.m., correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was working an event there.
And you said that on your way home that night, you forgot your wallet. This is true, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you had your phone with you the whole time.
I believe most people have their phone with them at all times now, and I did have my phone with me when I went back to look for my wallet.
And you then went back to the Engineers Club to look for your wallet, correct?
Yeah, I just wanted to look around. Didn't want to lose that.
And you claim that you found your wallet at 1:46 a.m. at the Engineers Club, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you agree that the Engineers Club is right next door to the Walters Art Museum, right?
Yes, Chesapeake City is a very small city.
And Miss Gardner, you are aware that the Walters Art Museum was robbed between 1:30 a.m. and 1:54 a.m. that morning, don't you?
I was not aware of it at the time, but I did learn later, yes.
And that is the same time that you claim you were right next door at the Engineers Club looking for your wallet, isn't it?
It was the end of a very long night. I was looking for my wallet and wanted to get straight home and to bed. I didn't really focus on anything else.
On January 6th, you deposited $7,800 into your bank account, correct?
That was a gift I received from my Uncle Andy, yes.
And that was $7,800 in cash that you deposited, right?
I'm grateful to have a generous family member, and yes, that is the cash I deposited.
Now I would like to show you what has been pre-admitted into evidence as prosecution exhibit number 7. There are 3 cash deposits between January 1st and 5th of let me rephrase. There are 3 cash deposits between January 1st and 5th. Isn't this true?
That is correct, yes.
So you went to the bank between this time to make these cash deposits, correct?
I deposited small deposits that I got from working at the Engineers Club, yes.
And I'm accurate in saying that you did not deposit the money you claim to have received before Christmas until January 6th. Did you not?
I'm young and I frankly have never had that type of money before. I was kind of stressed about what to do with it. So I didn't deposit it until January 7th.
So you're saying you held on to that cash for weeks, despite multiple visits to the bank for deposits?
The visits to my bank previously were for small deposits I got for working at my job, not something like a gift that had money that I'd never really handled before.
Miss Gardner, you claim that you received this cash from your uncle, correct?
I did receive it as a gift from my Uncle Andy, yes.
But you don't have the envelope the money came in. Isn't this true?
Unfortunately, I threw the envelope away, yes.
Nor do you have any written proof from your uncle, right?
Just because our family isn't close and it's a little complicated doesn't mean we can't support each other. But I don't have the letter from my uncle, no.
You also have no idea where your uncle is, correct?
Again, just because we're not close doesn't mean we can't support each other. My family has always been complicated and I don't know where he is now, no.
And Miss Gardner, you have no way at all to contact him. Isn't this true?
Right now, I do not have a way to contact him now.
Thank you. That's all, Your Honor.
Okay, is there any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay, witness stand down. Can you call your next witness?
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would like to call Armani Lee to the stand. Good evening, Ms. Lee.
Good evening.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes. Hello, my name is Armani Lee. I'm 23 years old and I work at the Engineers Club.
And how do you know Izzy Gardner?
Izzy Gardner is my roommate.
How did that come about?
Well, Miss Gardner and I met in December of 2019 at the Engineers Club. And I immediately got along with her and I asked if she would like to move in.
Now, Kate, or Miss Lee, I'm sorry, do you work anywhere in particular?
Yes, I work at the Engineers Club.
This is the same Engineers Club that Miss Gardner works at, is that correct?
Yes, she actually helped me get a job there.
And Miss Lee, why did you offer to rent a room in your apartment to somebody that you had just met?
Well, as soon as we started talking, I realized that she was a really kind and generous and interesting
Stop
person.
just a minute. Was there an objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead. My apology.
Miss Lee, would you like me to repeat the question? Yes.
Yes,
So
please.
why did you offer to rent a room in your apartment to somebody you just met?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, this goes to the character of the defendant, which is, I think, highly relevant to this case. And as well as the perception of the witnesses or the defendant's character is, I think, highly relevant to establishing her trustworthiness or willingness or reliance on or to commit a crime of some sort.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Go ahead.
The witness just said she had just met Miss Gardner when she agreed to let her rent a room. Testifying to that is not character testimony if she literally just met the witness. So I maintain that. And as well, the question calls for narration.
Okay.
Your Honor, I can move on.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I can move on, Your Honor. It's no big deal.
Good, because I was going to sustain the objection.
All right, thank you,
Ask
Your
your
Honor.
next question.
All right. Miss Lee, turning your attention to the evening of January 4th, 2020, did you go to work that evening?
At the Engineers Club with Miss Gardner.
And you and Miss Gardner worked together that evening, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, form of question.
I did.
leading.
All right, Your Honor,
Wait a
I'll just
minute.
read.
Wait a minute. Okay. Strike the answer. What's your objection?
Form of question leading.
Very good. Sustained. Ask another question.
Moving on. When did you get off work that evening, Miss Lee?
I got off from work around 12:30 in the morning.
And what did you do after you got off work?
I walked home with Miss Gardner.
And what happened once you got home with Miss Gardner?
Well, right before we walked in the door, Miss Gardner realized that she had left her wallet at the Engineers Club and decided to go back and look for it.
And so what happened once Miss Gardner left to return to the Engineers Club?
Well, I decided to go to sleep because I had just worked for a really long time.
And now between the 5th and the 7th of January, Miss Lee, did you ever see 3 large stolen pieces of art in your apartment?
No, and I think I really would have noticed because our apartment is quite small.
Mm-hmm.
Objection,
And
Your Honor, motion to strike everything after the I would have noticed, as it was speculation.
I think it was non-responsive, but you're objecting after the question has come in. So I'm going to overrule the objection. Ask another question.
Right.
Your Honor,
And
may I clarify? I was asking to strike that part of the witness's testimony and instruct the jury to disregard.
And I am overruling your objection and request. Thank you. Next question.
And Miss Lee, have you ever seen a gun in your apartment?
I have not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Good evening, Ms. Lee.
Good evening.
You're aware the defendant made a large cash deposit in the days following the robbery, correct?
Correct.
And the defendant attributes this to a thick envelope she received before Christmas of 2019.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness, this is questions asking the witness to speculate on something. She doesn't have firsthand knowledge of what Ms. Gardner may or may not have received.
May I respond?
Your response?
I hadn't asked the question yet. I was getting to the question.
Repeat the question that you're trying to ask then.
The defendant told you that this envelope came from an Uncle Andy, right?
Objection, Your Honor. In this case, the question is hearsay.
From the defendant? I'm sorry, go ahead. Your response?
It's an admission against the party that's the defendant in this case, therefore it is a hearsay exception.
I agree. The objection's overruled. Go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. The defendant told you this envelope came from her Uncle Andy, right?
No, I never heard of an Uncle Andy before I was asked about him.
So the defendant never mentioned an Uncle Andy to you, correct?
Correct.
And despite allegedly receiving this money that December, the defendant was late to pay her January rent, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't see the relevance of the rent payments in this case.
Your Honor, may I
Okay,
respond?
what's your response?
If it goes directly to what Miss Gardner used that money for and when she had acquired it. If she hadn't paid her rent, it casts doubt on whether or not she really had that money beforehand.
I agree. Objection's overruled.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question. Despite allegedly receiving this money in December of 2019, the defendant was late to pay her January rent, wasn't she?
That is correct, but she did end up paying it on January 7th.
The defendant paid it 2 days after the robbery, correct?
As I've been told, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, give me one moment. All right, call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Kenya Abara to the stand. Can we get a time check from the prosecution bailiff? Perfect, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Abara.
Good evening.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Dr. Kenya Abara.
What prior education have you received, Dr. Abara?
In 2008, I received my bachelor's in science in telecommunications from Towson University. And then in 2012, I received my PhD in engineering from the University of Maryland.
And what jobs have you held relating to the field of telecommunications?
From 2012 to 2014, I was an associate professor of mathematics at Frostburg State University. And after that, I left to start my own private consulting forensics telecommunications firm.
And what does this private consulting firm do?
We specialize in performing comparative analyses.
What are comparative analyses?
Comparative analyses are standard review in my field, where an expert checks another expert's telecommunications report and verifies it for accuracy.
How many comparative analyses have you completed since starting this business?
I've completed approximately 350.
Were you retained in this case?
Yes.
And what were you retained to do?
I was retained by the defense to perform a comparative analysis of Dr. Jordan Matthews' report.
What materials have you reviewed in order to perform your comparative analysis of Jordan Matthews' report?
I reviewed Dr. Jordan Matthews' report. I reviewed a map of Chesapeake City with the cellular towers and their networks overlaid. I reviewed a copy of the tracking report of the defendant's cell phone on the night of the heist, and I reviewed a copy of Izzy Gardner's affidavit.
And how many hours did you spend completing this comparative analysis?
I spent approximately 37, not including my time in trial.
And how much will the defendant be charged for your total work on this case?
We charged the defendant my standard rate, which worked out to be $30,200.
Have you testified in court before, Dr. Abara?
Yes, I have testified 15 times and have always been accepted by the court as an expert.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense asks that the court accept and qualify Dr. Kenya Abara as an expert in the field of telecommunications, specifically in the field of comparative analyses.
State, do you wish to voir dire the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Dr. Abara.
Good evening.
Dr. Abara, you've stated that you've served as an expert witness in 15 court cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that during each of those cases, you've worked exclusively for the defense?
Yes, because I was always performing a comparative analysis, that it normally ends up that I work for the defense.
Dr. Abara, you also mentioned that you have a paper coming out. Isn't it true that you have never published a peer review article or paper on any subject?
Yes, but I have one coming out in June.
Dr. Abara, you also don't hold any advanced degrees in telecommunications. Isn't that true?
No, I do not. However, my PhD is in a related subject.
Is that PhD in telecommunications specifically?
It is not in telecommunications specifically, but my bachelor's is.
Thank you. No further questions. And no objection. The state does not object to admitting this witness as an expert, Your Honor.
All right, then the witness will be admitted as an expert in the field of telecommunications and comparative analysis.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Dr. Abara, what exactly were the findings of your comparative analysis?
I found that Dr. Jordan Matthews overstated his findings. Izzy Gardner could have been in the alleyway in between the Engineers Club and the Walters Art Museum for the duration of the heist.
What were the factors that contributed to forming this expert opinion?
The main factor was Dr. Jordan Matthews' disregard for the margins of error.
What are margins of error?
Margins of error are an intentional level of overlap present in every cellular tower and antenna. They're manufactured into the antennas. Essentially, cellular companies create a level of overlap in order to prevent dead zones or an area where a consumer cell phone would not connect.
I'm now showing the witness and the jury what has been previously pre-admitted into evidence as Exhibit 12A, which is on page 128 of your packet. Dr. Abara.
You agree 12A is in evidence, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Abara, using this diagram, can you explain to the jury how a cellular tower and antennas would work in theory?
Of course. In theory, as you can see, a cellular tower would divide its network in between 3 antennas, all positioned to cover exactly 120 degrees.
Is the process that you've just explained always consistent with what occurs in practice?
No, it's almost impossible to map out how a cellular tower is going to divide its network in practice because every area of coverage is different and every cellular tower makes these tiny adjustments in order to provide full coverage.
Thank you, Dr. Abara. I would now like to ask you some questions about the margins of error in the context of this case. I am now sharing my screen to show what has been pre-admitted into evidence as Exhibit 11E and 11F on pages 126 and 127 respectively. What is this map of?
This is a map of Chesapeake City with cellular tower 109X and cellular tower 16X overlaid.
Can you explain to the jury what impact these margins of error you talk about have in the context of cellular tower 16 and 109?
Of course. As you can see here, not only does the Engineers Club alleyway fall on the border in between cellular tower 16X and 16Y, it also falls where there would be significant levels of overlap with cellular tower 16X and cellular tower 109X, which means that margins of error must be given their proper weight in this report.
Dr. Abara, Izzy Gardner has stated that she was in the alleyway between the Engineers Club and the Walters at the time of the robbery. In your expert opinion, could this testimony be correct?
Izzy Gardner could have been in the Engineers Club alleyway during the heist.
Was there any other information that further supported your expert opinion?
Yes. After I had conducted my analysis, I completed what's called a drive test analysis.
What is a drive test analysis?
A drive test analysis is where an expert walks or drives to the scene of the crime and attempts to recreate the conditions in order to see what connections would have been possible.
What precedent is there for using a drive test analysis in a criminal investigation?
Well, they've only recently become accepted into criminal investigations. However, cellular companies have been using them for years for their own internal tests.
Because of this, what weight did you give the drive test in the formation of your expert opinion?
I use the drive test to verify that I was correct.
What were the conditions like on the day of your drive test?
I conducted my drive test on March 8th from 1:20 a.m. to 2 a.m. It was 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside. I used an empty iPhone X and empty SIM card, both identical to the make and model of Izzy Gardner's cell phone on the night of the heist. And I checked with Xfinity Mobile that the configuration arrangement would be identical to what it had been on the night of the heist.
And what did you do in order to complete your drive test analysis?
At 1:20 a.m. on March 8th, I drove my car into the Engineers Club alleyway. And at 2 a.m., I turned the phone off and drove away. The next morning, I requested a copy of the tracking data, and 3 days later, I received it.
I am now showing the witness what has been pre-admitted into evidence as Exhibit 12D, as well as the aforementioned Exhibit 11F. Dr. Abara, what is this table in at 12D?
This is a copy of the tracking report I received from Xfinity Mobile of my drive test.
And what, if anything, was significant to you about this data?
As you can see, at 1:56 a.m. from the Engineers Club alleyway, my replica of Izzy Gardner's cell phone was able to connect to 16x.
What impact did this data have on your expert opinion?
This data merely confirmed my opinion that Izzy Gardner could have been in the Engineers Club alleyway during the duration of the heist and still have connected to Cellar Tower 16x.
Thank you, Dr. Abara. Your Honor, I have no further questions for the witness.
Okay. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Abara, you say that cell technology only tracks the phone and not the person, correct?
Yes.
However, you agree with me that there is no evidence in this case to suggest Izzy Gardner was ever without her phone from the time she left her apartment to get her wallet to the time she got back, correct?
Yeah, it seems like Izzy Gardner probably had her phone on her.
In fact, she testified to that on cross, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. My witness is not a party to this case, so she would not have been present for this testimony in court.
Was she present in court?
No, she would have been sequestered.
Okay, then the objection is sustained. Ask your next question.
Moving on, let's talk about a little bit about margin of error. Dr. Abara, you claim that Dr. Matthews underestimates the margin of error present in cellular tracking technologies. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I think he greatly underestimates it.
And you say this is because Dr. Matthews doesn't consider the possibility of adjacent antennas overlapping in order to produce a stronger signal, correct?
Yes.
And therefore you state that it's possible Izzy Gardner was located in the alleyway between 1:30 a.m. and 1:50 a.m. on the night of the robbery. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Dr. Abara, you would agree with me that a possibility is quite different than a reasonable degree of professional certainty, correct?
Yes, they are different levels of certainty.
And in fact, you can't say with any degree of certainty that Miss Gardner was in the alleyway as opposed to the Walters during the robbery, can you?
No, I cannot say with scientific certainty as to Izzy Gardner's whereabouts. However, I can say that I'm certain that there was a possibility that Izzy Gardner was in the alleyway.
But again, this is just a possibility, not to a degree of professional certainty.
No, I cannot claim to know that she was not in the art museum.
Dr. Abara, I also understand that you performed a drive test as part of your analysis. Is that true?
I performed it once I had completed my analysis.
My mistake, yes. And I understand that these tests are somewhat controversial in the cellular tracking field. Isn't that true?
They're somewhat controversial, as all relatively new technologies are.
Isn't it true that drive test analyses have only recently started even being accepted in criminal investigations?
Yeah, but there is a precedent. They have been accepted into criminal investigations.
Yes, only recently, correct?
Only recently.
And that's because you can never perfectly replicate the conditions of the night in question, correct?
You can never perfectly recreate all of the exact conditions. However, you can produce very similar and show that there was a possibility of certain connections.
When you conducted your drive test analysis, the conditions were different than the night of the robbery, correct?
Yes, there was a very slight difference in temperature.
Is it not true that March 8th was over 20 degrees warmer than January 4th and 5th?
I do not believe that is an extreme difference in temperature when it comes to a scientific setting.
And again, your drive test demonstrated that a cell phone in the alleyway could have connected to Sauer's 16X, correct?
Yes.
But again, this is just a possibility. You cannot say it with a scientific degree of certainty, correct?
Yes, all I'm saying is that there's definitely a possibility, which Jordan Matthews disagrees with.
Dr. Abara, isn't it true that you cannot say for sure that Izzy Gardner was not in the Walters during the time of the robbery on January 5th, 2020?
Objection, Your Honor. This question has been asked and answered multiple times.
What's your response, counsel?
I think getting a clear yes or no answer to this question is very important from this witness.
Has it been asked before?
I don't feel that the question has been answered directly. I feel that the witness has been trying to avoid the question.
Your Honor, just because this question
just a second. The question for counsel that I wanted to ask is, has it been asked before?
I don't think it's been asked in the same way before.
All right, I'm not going to argue that. I'm going to sustain the objection. Ask another question.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Right. Is there any recross?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Okay.
Right. The state rests as well.
Very good. All right, next.
Your Honor, defense, I think closing arguments are next.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being unprecise. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
State ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Give me 1 second. All right, defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Again, my name is Lucy Addis, and along with my co-counsel, Maya Egnall and Dana Graham, have presented a case that has maintained what my client has said all along. Izzy Gardner is not guilty. It has been an honor to argue this case, and we are thankful for your attention and objectivity throughout. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this trial, the judge is going to ask you an important question. That question is whether or not the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Izzy Gardner is guilty of general theft and first-degree assault. Members of the jury, it is clear that the prosecution has offered insufficient evidence to convict my client. You've listened to a lot of witnesses today, you've seen a lot of evidence, and you've heard a lot of argument. Let's go to the main points that each side has proven or failed to prove. First, on the state side, you heard from Casey Hudson, who testified under oath that she never even liked Miss Gardner, that she is tens of thousands of dollars in debt. She claims to have seen the face of Miss Gardner during the heist, a face Hudson claims to have seen through a mirror across the room while blindfolded, tied up in pitch black while the robber was wearing a mask. Ladies and gentlemen, does this seem like the testimony of an unbiased witness or the testimony of a bitter ex-coworker with secrets of her own? Testimony given in court today reveals that only 2 eyewitness accounts of the robbery at the Walters exist, the account of Hudson and the account of Banerjee. Banerjee states that the two used the Walters call box to speak to the robbers, while Hudson testifies that they did not use the call box to speak to the robbers. Contradicting testimony, one glaring inconsistency. How many more are there? Are we going to rely on 2 inconsistent statements to imprison an innocent woman? You heard from Dr. Jordan Matthews, expert witness for the state, who testified that even she had doubt in her own findings. Dr. Matthews repeatedly admitted that she could not be certain of her findings in this case. Now that doesn't really sound like beyond a reasonable doubt to me. Are we going to send an innocent woman to jail because of a most likely from Dr. Matthews? You also heard from Detective Barnes, who acknowledged alternate suspect Sydney Ross, who was not investigated and still has not been found. The state has argued that only someone familiar with the Walters Museum entrances and exits could have robbed the museum, which Sydney Ross would be. Yet Detective Barnes only did minimal investigation into this suspect. Detective Barnes, a woman too busy chasing down my innocent client to pursue any other leads, a woman who ignored the questions right in front of her face. Like, where would Miss Gardner hide the money or the art? Like, how can Miss Gardner have turned around and sold the paintings in a day? Like, how could a 19-year-old art history student pull off a $600,000 art heist? I encourage you to ask yourself these same questions when you go to deliberate this case. Now, ladies and gentlemen, really reflect on the weight of this testimony by a security guard who contradicts the only other eyewitness, an expert who cannot offer an 100%, and a detective who chased down just one person, just one lead. My client, Izzy Gardner. Now, as you saw today, ladies and gentlemen, the defense has offered a reliable counter-argument to the state's case. First, you heard from 19-year-old Izzy Gardner. She gave plausible explanations to every point made against her. The state has claimed that the large deposit in her bank account was from the selling of stolen art. Yet the state has provided zero evidence of the sale, much less any reasoning behind why Miss Gardner, if she was guilty, would have accepted almost $8,000 for artwork worth $600,000. Further, Gardner has openly cooperated with investigation, allowing Detective Barnes to search her home, explaining her bank records, and is even here in court today. Does that seem like the actions of a guilty person? Next, you heard from Armani Lee, the closest friend of the defendant. She testified under oath that the night this master heist had taken place, Miss Gardner was with her for most of the time. She testified that Miss Gardner had gone back to look for her wallet at the Engineers Club that night, just as Miss Gardner said she did, and that there would have been nowhere to hide the art in their tiny apartment. Miss Gardner and Miss Lee's testimonies match. They corroborate each other. The two security guards, not so much. Lastly, you heard from Dr. Abara, expert witness in telecommunications. Dr. Abara, who conducted a drive test analysis evaluating the reliability of the cell towers at the center of the state's case. The state's witness, Dr. Matthews, has done no such analysis or test. Dr. Abara testified today that Ms. Gardner's testimony is consistent with all forensic evidence and that the margin of error for cell tracking technology cannot be ignored in this case. There cannot be a margin of error for justice, ladies and gentlemen. Detective Barnes's rush to judgment against my client has resulted in the trial of an innocent woman. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense has offered testimony, evidence, and argument to refute the state's case. The state has offered circumstantial evidence, contradicting witnesses, and paper-thin arguments, all of which add up to one thing: reasonable doubt. At the conclusion of this trial, the judge is going to explain to you previous case law relevant to this case. A previous precedent established in Warfield v. State posits that proximity to the scene of a crime does not equal guilt. The charges brought against Gardner today, general theft and first-degree assault, have not been proven. For general theft, the state would have had to prove that Gardner both obtained stolen property and possessed stolen property. Neither has been proven to the standard of the court. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that the stolen art pieces have yet to be found. How can the state prove my client is in possession of property they can't even locate? For first-degree assault, the state would have had to prove that a firearm was used. The security guard testified that they couldn't be sure if the object held by the thieves was even a real gun. Further, the state has not proved conclusively that my client was even one of the robbers, because it's simple. She wasn't. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'd like to remind you of the burden of proof in this case, which rests solely with the prosecution. The state must prove Izzy Gardner guilty of general theft and first-degree assault beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof in this case is like a chain. Every link must connect, or it all falls apart. If you leave this courtroom with even a shadow of a doubt, I urge you to return with a verdict of not guilty on both counts. Thank you.
Is the prosecution ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed.
Good evening, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. In the early morning of January 5th, 2020, two suspects entered the Walters Art Gallery dressed as police officers, tied up the security guards, threatened them with a firearm, and stole 3 timeless pieces of artwork. Indisputable cellular tracking technology, eyewitness testimony, and a thorough police investigation have demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that it was the defendant, Izzy Gardner, who was one of the people who committed the crime of felony theft and first-degree assault. To start, the state has proved beyond reasonable doubt that Ms. Gardner lied about her whereabouts on the night in question. Expert in cellular tracking technology, Dr. Matthews, explained that while Ms. Gardner claimed to be looking for her wallet, her cell phone told a different story. It's important to note that the defendant confirmed she had her phone on her at all times on the night in question in sworn testimony here today. Yet between 1:38 a.m. and 1:50 a.m., the very times the crime was taking place, supposedly just next door to where she was, the defendant's cell phone pinged to Tower 16X, which explicitly doesn't include the Engineers Club, nor the alleyway between the Walters and the Engineers Club that she claimed to be in. but it does include the Walters Art Museum, the scene of the crime. My opposing counsel's claims that there may have been a mistake in the Xfinity mobile cellular data is absolutely baseless and would be a 1 in a million fluke that doesn't affect Dr. Matthews' degree of certainty and does not deconstruct beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense's expert, Dr. Abara, vastly exaggerates the margin of error of cellular tracking technology, especially at the margins. Her drive test, which is a practice not commonly accepted in her field because of its proven unreliability, was under the conditions 20 degrees different from the night in question. What she testified temperature changes can have an impact on tower connections, and thus proving nothing to the degree of certainty that Dr. Matthews testified with. In order to convict the defendant of first-degree assault, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Izzy Gardner had an intent to frighten Casey Hudson and used a firearm to do so. The first element in proving this intent to frighten is that the defendant committed an act with the intent to place Ms. Hudson in fear of immediate harm. Ms. Gardner did this when she pointed a gun at Ms. Hudson's face as she testified to, making this element in the threat subsequent to that gun blatant. Secondly, the state must prove that the defendant had the apparent ability to bring about that physical harm, which Ms. Gardner did with her finger on the trigger as she held the gun to Ms. Gardner's face in a lethal proximity. Next, the state must prove that Ms. Hudson reasonably feared physical harm. Ms. Hudson directly testified to being terrified that she was going to be shot and killed. Finally, the state bears the burden of proof in proving that the defendant's actions were not legally justified. There is absolutely no legal justification for pretending to be a police officer, tying up your ex-coworker, blindfolding her, and threatening her both verbally and with a firearm. Furthermore, the precedent set by Copeland v. State provides that a gun does not need to be fired, nor does fireability need to be proved to meet the requirements of first-degree assault. Rather, an eyewitness identifying a firearm being used in the crime, as Ms. Hudson's testimony has unequivocally done, is sufficient in meeting the firearm element. In order to prove felony theft, the state must prove an additional 3 elements. First, that the defendant willingly or knowingly obtained property of the owner. Ms. Hudson's eyewitness testimony to seeing Ms. Gardner cut the painting Springtime from its frame on the night of the robbery meets this element and demonstrates beyond a reasonable doubt Ms. Gardner's intentional theft of the Walters property. Second, the state must prove that the defendant had the purpose of depriving the owner of this property. Ms. Gardner had 2. Her first purpose was personal. Ms. Gardner loved the art, and the defense hasn't been scared to say that today in court. In fact, she testified to having an attraction to Rubens' vase and wandering the halls looking at the art that she loved. And when she was no longer able to spend hours among it after being fired, she resolved to take it away from the public. Her second purpose was monetary. Gardner sold the art and used the funds. The defendant claims she could have coincidentally waited till a few days after the crime to deposit $7,800 she's said to have received before Christmas, which isn't just dubious, but a clear falsehood, as she made 3 separate cash deposits on each of the 3 days preceding. Ms. Gardner testified to a fabricated uncle that gave her this large sum of money, who she conveniently has no way of contacting and not even a card or any proof of, nor did her roommate know anything about this. The truth is, under police pressure, Ms. Gardner sold the art for significantly less than its value, as the expert in criminal investigative techniques, Detective Barnes, testified as common of inexperienced criminals. Detective Barnes held to a reasonable degree of professional certainty that that $7,800 bank account deposit reflected on Ms. Gardner's bank account were income from pawning the artwork she stole. Lastly, the state must prove the value of the property was over $100,000. Detective Barnes' testimony and the FBI art appraisal have definitively demonstrated the values of each of the art stolen. The Madonna of the Candelabra, Springtime, and the Rubens vase are worth $175,000, $125,000, and $300,000 respectively, bringing the total value of art Ms. Gardner stole from the Walters Art Museum to $600,000, well exceeding the $100,000 minimum. Additionally, the state has even proved the non-essential element of motive. Ms. Gardner struggled financially while even employed by the Walters. So desperate, she stole merchandise from a local Target and was charged by theft. Ms. Gardner attempted to act like she was so young and naive when she committed this first theft on the stand, despite it being 3 months before the crime being deliberated today. When she was fired from the Walters Art Museum, her boss even thought she might rob the Walters, the very crime we're proving here today, and cited the defendant's repeated untrustworthiness as the primary reason for her termination. After being fired, Ms. Gardner's financial state only worsened. She testified to barely being able to scrape by and relying on a roommate she had just met for cheap rent that she couldn't even pay until after the robbery. The defendant testified to both resent for her former coworkers when she admitted to the cruel threat she spewed at Ms. Ross when her coworker Ms. Ross discovered the conviction Ms. Gardner was lying by omission about. She also admitted to having intimate knowledge of her former workplace and spending hours wandering the hall. And with her inherent temper and understanding of the Walters, it was a conscious choice to take a part-time job just an alleyway away where she could continue to observe it. Ultimately, this case is about a desperate individual with a thirst for retaliation who targeted her former workplace and coworkers to solve her troubling financial situation. By proving each of the elements, the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms.
Pardon
Gardner—
me, state, your time is over.
May I finish my sentence, Your Honor?
Finish your sentence.
The state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms. Gardner is guilty of first-degree assault of Casey Hudson in violation of Criminal Law Article 3-202 and guilty of felony theft in violation of Criminal Law Article 104. We ask that the jury deliver a guilty verdict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank both teams very much. It was an excellent job. We're told that each of the 5 other judges plus myself may wish to offer brief comments to each of you. So if nobody minds, I'll just go right through the list. Judge Troy, do you have any comments for the group?
Hi, everybody. What I would like to say is that I'm impressed with the fact that you all have made it this far, and I think you all deserve to have a pat on the back. This is not the easiest thing to do, even for those who have studied the law and have actually gone to law school. So I am truly impressed with all the teams that I've seen. I've seen several, and every time I come into this, it just gets better and better. So I really wish that you all, if you actually are considering going in this direction, you already have a leg up on all of us, because when I was in high school, I was certainly not doing what you're doing. So you already have a leg up on all of us. I think it's very impressive. I think your ability to argue the points and to stay on track and to not get ruffled by the other side, that's very impressive, especially at such a young age.